Thank you very much to both of you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. Hopefully you can see my screen happily, and I will now check that I can move on as well. The first thing I'd like to do is mention that all the slides in this presentation can be downloaded as a PDF from the address that you see on the screen now. That's norecopa.no/today's date 1907-21. And I have quite a lot of slides, and I will be talking relatively quickly, but don't worry about writing anything down from the screen because everything is on the PDF that you can download from that address. I've also put my email address on the first slide, and you're very welcome to contact me afterwards if you have any questions or comments that we don't have time to talk about today. So I'm going to be telling you a bit more about what's happening in this little country with just over 5 million inhabitants on the top of Europe. And I ought to stress that I will be making some personal opinions as well as opinions from Norecopa. So the usual proviso that the views expressed in this presentation are mine and not necessarily those of Norecopa. Norecopa is, as you heard, Norway's national consensus platform for all the 3 R's: replacement, reduction, and refinement. We have a motto which is prepare for better science. I'll be coming back to the prepare part of that, but we are promoting better science, whether it still involves animals or whether we have been able to replace them with alternatives. So we cover all the 3 R's. But we're not just a platform of 3 R activities in Norway. We're very much a source of global 3 R resources, and that's the aim of our website. And if you know of any resources that aren't on our website, then please do contact us, and you'll hear more about how you can contact us during the presentation. Just like to explain a bit about the background for the foundation of Norecopa. It comes from the time when there was a lot of aggression and, in many cases, violence against animal research and testing. Strong views were being expressed, and in many cases, equally strong views were being expressed by those who were for animal research. And during the late 1990s, it was felt that it would be helpful if we had a forum where we could try and get these different stakeholders around the table and look for common ground. And in the year 2000, an organization called ECOPA was established. ECOPA stands for European Consensus Platform for Alternatives. And ECOPA recognizes national consensus platforms that have all the 4 major stakeholders equally represented in their governing bodies. And that's the scientists, regulators, those working in industry, and animal welfare. And Norecopa was established in 2007, but long before that, we supported the development of the idea of ECOPA, and we were one of the first to join ECOPA. This is a little map showing the number of countries that are affiliated to ECOPA. There are in fact only 7, because although we have many 3 R centers, there are over 30 just in Europe, there aren't that many that have all the 4 stakeholders in their governing body. This isn't necessarily a disadvantage, but Norway at any rate was very grateful for the establishment of ECOPA, because politically it was very important when we established the organization to show that we were trying to achieve consensus with all those involved. And my experience certainly is it's been a great help having all these stakeholders in the governing body and sharing experiences, looking for common ground. And it's been a very fruitful exercise. This map is taken from an interactive global map that we made fairly recently in Norecopa. The address on the screen, norecopa.no/global3R. And just like to tell you a bit more about that as well. We in Norway have close relations with the other Scandic and Nordic and Baltic countries. Among other things, we have a lot to do with the organization Scanlas, which is the Society for Laboratory Animal Science in the Nordic region. And in fact, we had a series of webinars where all the Nordic countries were represented a couple of months ago, where we discussed advances in the 3 Rs in this part of the world. We are also heavily involved with the Federation of European Laboratory Animal Science Associations, FELASA, and we have also been actively involved in the establishment of European network of 3R centres. I said there are now about 30 centres, some working with all 3Rs, some working with just one or two of them. And this is one of the reasons why we made this interactive map, so that we could show which countries were involved in this network. And the network has started cooperating to write applications for funds to do more work together. And Norecopa has also had quite a lot of invitations to visit or to lecture to the Asian countries that are members of the Asian Federation for Laboratory Animal Science Associations. This is what the map looks like in more detail. We have, as you can see on the right here, both centers for replacement, reduction, refinement, and also associations. So you can use those filters to home in on the centers or associations you're interested in. And please do let me know if there are 3R centers or associations which you would like to see on this map. As you can see, there are a lot of holes still. This is a fairly new enterprise, but we'd be very happy to highlight more centers on the map. I'm going to be showing you quite a lot of pictures from the Norecopa website, and this is sometimes just as interesting as when somebody invites you around to their house and all they do is show you photographs from their summer vacation. I hope you'll find this useful. We certainly made this website because we had a need for it ourselves, and we felt also that the scientists and animal carers and technicians who we were lecturing to needed a source of 3R resources. So it's certainly something we built for a practical purpose. It's updated all the time, many times each week. At present, there are about 8,500 web pages, and we get about 300,000 hits a year. And in addition to that, we produce very detailed newsletters 7 or 8 times a year. So you can also keep abreast of the latest developments within the 3Rs by subscribing to these newsletters. And at the end of the presentation, I'll show you how you can subscribe to them. Let's see, some reason, yeah. Here are just a few comments about the setup of the website. The main menu is the text in white on the blue background, but under each of those words there's a submenu, which you can access. Here's the submenu for more resources. You can see there are a lot of issues here. There's a search engine as well, which we've tuned specifically to laboratory animal science. It's got its own synonym list, and there are a lot of search filters that come up when you do a search, so you can use these to narrow down the number of hits which you receive when you do a search. And if you get lost anywhere, you can just click on the star or the word Norecopa at the top of the page, and that'll take you back to the home page. We have a separate page with a meetings calendar, and the number of webinars and virtual meetings has really exploded after the COVID-19 pandemic started, and you'll find a lot of meetings on this. We update this also very regularly. We also have separate web pages for past meetings, and those that have been recorded, where the recordings are available for everybody, whether they were registered or not for the meeting. So if you've missed a meeting, you can go to the other pages, and either listen to a recording or contact the organizers and see if any information is available. We hold quite a lot of meetings ourselves, and we make sure that all the presentations are available afterwards on the net as PDF files. We also have award a 3-hour prize at our annual meetings of about $3,000, and this has been very valuable to highlight the 3 hours activities in Norway, and you can read more about this on our website. In particular, we have international consensus meetings where we utilize this fact that we do have all the stakeholders involved in governance of Norecopa. And we've focused on those species which are not discussed in such great detail at the mainstream lab animal science meetings like fish and wildlife. And in addition to the presentations from these meetings, these websites also contain the consensus statements that we write after these meetings, where we write the conclusions from the meeting, the state of the art when working with these groups of animals, and the work that should be done by somebody, whether it's Norecopa, researchers or other organizations, to advance the 3 hours within these forms of research. So all these presentations and consensus statements are also a lasting resource after the meetings are over. The Norecopa website is actually one big database, but in it there are a lot of data sets embedded which function in a way as their own databases, and I'll be coming back to some of them in a few minutes. We have links to over 70 other databases on the website. One of the databases, which actually was started way back in 1991, long before Norecopa was established, is called Norina, and it consists of information on about 2,500 alternatives to the use of animals in education and training at all levels, right from schools. I gather in the US that a lot of animals are still used for dissection purposes, and there are a lot of alternatives to dissections within Norina. Also through undergraduate training in subjects like physiology and pharmacology, replacements for the classical experiments that have been performed there, to the needs within laboratory animal science for carers, technicians, scientists to learn techniques like blood sampling, injections, suturing, knot tying, these sort of things. So there are simulators for all those purposes as well in Norina. And when the pandemic started and a lot of school children were having to work from home, we also made a list of resources from Norina that were suitable for home learning. So some of you might be interested in that page as well. We have a lot of training films and slideshows on the site. Some of these we've made ourselves, and others are links to other productions from other institutions. And we've also highlighted the much cheaper homemade educational materials that a lot of clinicians are now producing. Very imaginative, easy to make simulators for teaching techniques like surgery and bleeding, blood sampling, for example. And you'll find links to more information about these on the address on the screen here. We also have a database with about 400 records in it called 3-Hour Guide. And this is a collection that we made in collaboration with AWIC, that's the Animal Welfare Information Center at the National Agricultural Library in the US, where we collected information on guidelines from all over the world about animal research and testing. And we've also made a few of these guidance documents ourselves. This is one on the severity classification of procedures involving fish. And we made that because we felt that the EU reports from their working group focus very heavily on terrestrial animals, particularly rodents. And we needed guidance that was even more relevant to those using fish, which obviously live under different conditions and will experience procedures in many different ways from terrestrial animals. So this is a report from a working group that we convened on that subject. And we've written a number of other guidance documents as well, such as these ones in the panel on the right. The first resource that was mentioned in the introduction to this lecture, which I like to talk about, is the PREPARE guidelines. And the starting point for PREPARE was the ongoing discussion and increasing concerns about the so-called reproducibility crisis, that scientists were unable to reproduce other scientists' work or even their own work, let alone translate the results of animal experiments into clinical human medicine. And many of the causes of this crisis, this lack of reproducibility, have been said to be the ones on the screen here: publication bias, low statistical power, p-value hacking, harking, and lack of randomization and blinding. We have a lot more information about these on our website. This is very well and important, but I have a number of thoughts about this, and I think these are shared by the co-authors of the PREPARE guidelines, that although there can be a lot of variability within the areas I just mentioned, one of the greatest sources of variability, if not the greatest, lies with actually within the animals themselves and the way in which we use them. And I suspect that many scientists are unaware of the size of this problem, or they assume that the animal facility is dealing with it. They leave it up to us to decide how we're going to inject the animals. So there were a couple of frustrations that were building up, and one of them was when we heard people who were debating the reproducibility crisis say that, you know, we can solve this problem by courses in experimental design, by which they meant primarily what one might call the more mathematical aspects of design, like randomization, experimental units, blinding, and correct statistical methods. And the other frustration was when we got the impression that people believe that you can solve this crisis by better reporting. Now, this is a burnt cake, and however well I describe that cake, it's still burnt. There's only one way I can do anything about that, and that's to go back to the kitchen and change the baking time and the recipe if I want a better cake. We can't improve it by describing it. Now, I'm not saying that good reporting is not essential. Of course it is, but there is a great need for better planning as well, and that is an essential part of the solution for the reproducibility crisis. And that's where the PREPARE guidelines come in. Here's just one paper illustrating the point I've been making. It's a very nice paper by Marcus Minifo and colleagues about how to approach this reproducibility problem. Here we see many of the weaknesses I mentioned just now: publication bias, p-hacking, low power, etc. What I would like to see is greater focus on the animal-related issues and the 3 R's. And in my opinion, this is really a no-brainer. If the animals are the greatest source of variation, the way they're held is the greatest source of variation, then it's obvious that we can't fix the reproducibility crisis until we do something about that as well. So reporting is really important, but planning is the part of the iceberg that we don't see, but which is essential for a good result. In fact, we've had reporting guidelines for many years, as long as I've been working in this field, since the early 1980s. There have been reporting guidelines available, because this always has actually been a problem, that reporting has not been up to standard. And we certainly do need guidelines for that. There are many things to be considered, and this is a book from way back in 1994, written by scientists in the pharmaceutical industry who, after a long career there, wrote a book on all the factors that often are neglected when doing research. And what I'm trying to do is bring together these two groups of people, the scientists who maybe are by nature more familiar with the more mathematical aspects of planning an experiment, and the laboratory animal personnel who, because they're working face to face with the animals and see the challenges in the animal house every day, are maybe more concerned about the variations caused by the animals themselves and the conditions under which they're kept. Scientists, for obvious reasons, if they're, say, looking to measure blood glucose levels in mice of two different strains on two different feeds, will be most interested in the blood samples and the machine to analyze the blood glucose levels. Whereas we know that the mice will be affected by many things from the day they're born through the process of care and housing and sampling, and there will be often a lot of issues that may be directly painful or damaging to them in that process. Here's just one example. I don't have time now to illustrate this in great detail, but it's a fairly recent paper from the US by Rachel Labit and colleagues, which was rather fun because it actually illustrates something that Norecopa has been working with. They found that if you scruff mice using the traditional method, where you pick up a longitudinal fold of skin on the back of the neck, you create pressure on the throat, which then stimulates the vagal nerve and causes sinus bradycardia and ventricular irregularities, which you can see for, on average, 4 minutes after these animals have been scruffed, and in some cases up to 6 minutes. What they noticed was that if they used a slightly different method, we made a little 2-minute video film some while ago, which we put out on the web, of this alternative method of scruffing, where you pick up a skin fold across the back of the neck rather than longitudinally, and avoiding this pressure on the throat, then you don't get the same changes in heart frequency and rhythm. So this just shows how much there is to think about when planning an experiment if we're not going to introduce variation or artifacts into the data we're obtaining from the animals. And I rather like this policy report from the Joint Research Centre in the EU, suggesting ways of bridging these gaps between the scientists and the people working in the animal facilities. And I think this is a challenge to those who are, particularly in basic research, used to trying to humanize an animal model rather than replace it with alternative methods or using, say, human tissue instead. So there's work to be done, and we need dialogue, and this is why I think the concept of a consensus platform is such a good idea. The prepared guidelines were published in 2017. That was shortly after an EU conference in December 2016, where this really was being highlighted, the way forward in the EU as regards animal research, and the need for better planning as well as better reporting really was on the agenda as well. The paper was published under open access in the journal Laboratory Animals. And we got a lot of inspiration from the aviation industry when we wrote Prepare. All of those who've traveled by plane, that's something I haven't done since March last year, will have been impressed by the reproducibility, the precision that pilots show, how they manage to land in the same place time after time, despite the variable environment within which they work. This is from the north of Norway. You may not even be able to see the airfield until I put a ring around it. So how do they manage this? And if you talk to the pilots, they'll tell you that it's the checklist that they use, even 10 or 15 of them on a short routine flight, which are the secret. These reduce their risk of forgetting any vital actions. They ensure that everything is done in the correct sequence. They encourage cooperation and cross-checking, and they make sure that everyone's literally on the same page. And they use these checklists regardless of how many times they've flown the same route in the same weather conditions. And obviously it's too late to pull out all the checklists and read them when you actually come to the arrival gate. They have to be used at the appropriate time during the flight or even before the flight starts. We also got a lot of inspiration from work that was done within human medicine. This is a very entertaining book by Atul Gawande, who was responsible for making a surgical safety checklist for the World Health Organization, which has been used both in developing and developed countries to dramatically reduce the number of post-surgical infections, fatalities, and other complications within human surgery. So again, the take-home message is how valuable these checklists are. Prepare consists of 15 main topics. These are in 3 main groups. The first one is about formulation of the study, how important it is to start with literature searches. There may even be no need to undertake the experiment. We may be able to do a systematic review on previously conducted experiments and synthesize new evidence from existing data. There may be legal issues, there will certainly be ethical issues, a need to assess the harm and benefit of the experiment we're planning, look for human endpoints, and of course, focus on experimental design and how we're going to analyze the data. And then there's a really important section on the dialogue between scientists and the animal facility itself, the objectives and the timescale, who's going to be paying for what, who's going to be doing what. I spend a lot of time talking about this when I lecture on planning animal studies, evaluating the facility to see whether the infrastructure and the staff are up to the experiment that is being planned. Do they need more education and training? And not least, are there going to be health risks, and who is going to be disposing of the waste, and how are we going to do that, and how are we going to decontaminate the area afterwards? These are things that scientists may not be so focused upon, but somebody's going to have to be clearing up afterwards. And then we have a section on, as you would expect, describing and planning the substances and procedures that the animals are beginning to receive, the animals themselves and their quarantine, health monitoring, husbandry, housing, the procedures are going to be done on them, and what happens to them afterwards, whether they're going to be killed, released, reused, or rehomed, and if they're going to be killed, quality assurance of the way in which the necropsies are performed. So the prepare consists of a checklist. There are actually a total of nearly 40 topics altogether on it. There are several under each of the 15 main topics. And it's available at present in 25 languages. If there's a language that's not on our list, then do let me know, and we'd be very happy to help publish a translation in further languages. There's a lot of emphasis on the 3 R's in the prepare checklist. It's offered as a voluntary aide-memoire for scientists, something that we hope they will use from day one. It's certainly not supposed to be yet another regulatory burden for scientists, yet another document they have to tick and sign off before they can start doing their experiments. What we hope is that they will see it as a friendly gesture from people who have seen all the problems, all the variations that can occur when planning and conducting animal research, and give them ideas of topics which they should be thinking about from day one. So here's also another iceberg with the prepare checklist as the bit over the surface, because there is another second very important part to prepare, and that's the website itself. The checklist is now static, where we have no plans of changing the text on it, but the website is being updated all the time, many times each week. And you'll find it under the main menu of the Norecopa website. It looks like this. This is topic 3, and there is text describing the topic or the subtopic, and there are many links to quality guidelines, to scientific papers from all over the world on the topics themselves. For example, guidelines on blood sampling or injection volumes or housing of animals or analgesia. And these pages are updated all the time as new knowledge is published. What we've done just very recently in the last few weeks is add an extra tab to these topics for fish researchers, because, as I said, there are a lot of different challenges when using fish for research and testing, and we're gradually expanding the text under those tabs. And in the future, we'll also hope that we'll have a tab for wildlife researchers, because they have also an additional set of challenges. And again, if you have comments about the content of these prepare pages or suggestions for additional material, then do please let me know. I've highlighted here in pink the items on the prepare checklist which are not typically highlighted in reporting guidelines. And I hope this will convince you why I feel there is a need both for planning guidelines and for reporting guidelines. We can't use reporting guidelines, in my opinion, to plan an experiment from day one, because the planning process should involve a lot of considerations which would never get written up in a scientific paper, but which are essential for the quality of the work that is being published and reported. Here is the essential 10 list from the ARRIVE reporting guidelines, which are the most well-known ones of those. And if you look at the descriptions of these 10 topics, you'll see that 8 of the 10 are what I called the more mathematical issues. These are extremely important, and they should be documented in scientific papers. But the object of prepare is, in addition, to make sure that we focus on the other elements that I've already described, so that we make sure that the animal-related issues, the facility-related issues, which can cause so much variation in an experiment, are properly planned and described in sufficient detail as well. The ARRIVE guidelines have a very nice website where they have text and links describing each topic in the same sort of way as the prepare website did. And here's an example of one of those pages. And we've made sure on the prepare website that we have linked to these examples and these references from the ARRIVE guidelines. So when you go through the prepare website, it will also be linked to the examples and references from the ARRIVE guidelines. So what we're hoping, as I say, with prepare, is that scientists will perceive prepare as not just another set of guidelines, but something that will help them from day one to plan better research, and that they will be able to say, if you like, that we arrived because we were prepared. It will be easier to submit a manuscript to the journals because you will discover that you have thought about the issues which the reviewers and the editors are likely to ask, and you've had time to tackle those issues, and you're prepared to answer them. And it's all about not just better science, but also improved animal welfare, advancement of the 3 Rs, and also a safer working environment. And this is, again, in my opinion, a no-brainer, having worked in Animal House for 30 years, that we have to look at all these issues if we're going to be planning good animal research or testing. We've made a 3-minute cartoon film using the aviation industry analogy, which you might like to look at, and there are subtitles to this in several languages. The next topic I'd like to mention in less detail, it's a newer enterprise, but one which we'd certainly like your help with, is the development of a refinement wiki. This was born from the knowledge that a lot of good ideas on how we can refine animal research and testing are circulating, not least on discussion forums, but many of these never get published. Some forums do have archives. In many cases, those archives are only available for members, so that they preserve the security of the forum and they can be more frank in their discussions. Few are public, but in many cases, a lot of good ideas are circulated. People brainstorm about challenges and come up with good suggestions, but these disappear into thin air and never see the light of day in any form of scientific publication. So we decided to make a wiki that could be a portal for rapid publication and dissemination of these ideas. And it could also be a place where, if people were prepared to publish under their own name, one could identify experts on specific refinement techniques, or also a place where you could find collaborators if you want to do a multi-lab study on refinement. So we received funding to develop a wiki. This was done during the winter of 2019-2020, and as luck would have it, it was launched about the same time as most of Europe went into lockdown. So from that point on, people have had a lot of other things to think about, but there was a lot of enthusiasm to produce this wiki, and we're glad we've done it. We now need more help to populate it. It uses the same type of editor that you will be familiar with if you've seen Wikipedia, and we made a quite complicated instruction manual for those who would like to contribute themselves, but we also offer to add material ourselves if a colleague doesn't want to spend the time and effort of entering the data themselves. This is a page on clicker training. As you can see, it accommodates both pictures, images. We can have films in it as well as text and references, just as a Wikipedia page would do. So far, we only have 30 or so pages in the refinement wiki, with varying amounts of detail. And we would be very grateful to hear about people who are prepared to add information to the wiki, to the refinement wiki, either if they would like to become a user themselves, and you can either add the information anonymously, or you can have a user page so people can contact you for more information. We are also in the process of adding information from a closed discussion group. We're editing the discussions there and adding them anonymously to the wiki, so that's also one way in which it's growing. But there is plenty of room for more information here, and we hope that in the next few months and years that this wiki will grow considerably in size. We got off to, as I say, a fairly slow start because of the pandemic. So do please contact me if you would like to contribute to this. The third initiative I'd like to tell you about is concerned with a culture of care. And when I lecture to students about this, I often use the tragic accidents with the space shuttle as an example of the pitfalls we should avoid, where there was a certain amount of poor communication between management and engineers. They were using complex machinery which had two important design weaknesses. There was a lot of external pressure to launch, and there was a temptation to fly these shuttles despite the presence of these design weaknesses. And there were a lot of analogies between what went wrong there and the pitfalls when conducting in vivo research. And one of the problems, as I said, was inadequate communication between the engineers on the floor who knew about the problems and management who were making the decisions as to whether to launch or not, and the political pressure. And a combination of many factors, even if they may individually appear small and insignificant, if they occur simultaneously, cause this so-called Swiss cheese effect, where they can cause a significant issue. This is what I talk more about when I lecture on quality assurance of planning animal research. And if you don't believe small details are important, then try spending a night in a tent with a mosquito. So a culture of care is important within a laboratory animal facility to make sure that all those involved, the animal carers, the technicians, the veterinarians, and the management, are all talking together, and they're prepared to air the concerns they might have. And this culture of care is something we need wherever we're working with laboratory animals. And it's been defined as a demonstrable commitment throughout the establishment, as I say, at all levels of the hierarchy, to improving both animal welfare, scientific quality, care of staff, and transparency for all the stakeholders, including the public, and going beyond simple compliance with the legal requirements. And about 5 years ago now, Thomas Bertelsen, who works at Novo Nordisk in Denmark, took an initiative to start an international culture of care network, and now has a lot of members from many countries, not just in Europe. Norecopa runs the website for the network, which has the simple address you can see on this page. And we've assembled a lot of resources on the website about how to improve the culture of care at a facility. There are practical suggestions, there are posters, and there is what we call a quick start guide for those who want to make some rapid improvements in the culture at their institution. And if you think this sounds interesting and you would like to join the network, then you can find more details about how to do that on the network website. Here you can see the countries at the moment that are represented in the network. This is again from the interactive map that I showed you just at the beginning of the presentation. Prepare is very concerned about this and encourages scientists to collaborate with animal carers and technicians from day one. I found this really important when running an animal facility. And there are some very good moral as well as scientific reasons why the carers and the technicians should be involved right from the beginning of planning an experiment. First of all, of course, they have a moral right to know why they are using animals, and in many cases treat them in such a way that they become harmed during the experiment. And they will be far more motivated if they, from day one, have heard all the details about the aims and objectives of the experiment. It's often at the very first meetings between scientists and the animal facility that the scientists paint the big picture and tell you, where we think we're onto a cure for Alzheimer's. And it's important that the carers and technicians get to hear that, and not just later in the day that they're going to be injecting 100 mice and 50 of them are going to get sick. The second point is also really crucial, because they, better than anybody else, know the possibilities and not least the limitations in the animal facility where the work's to be done. It may be very tempting to say yes to a project if there's a lot of prestige associated with it, but if it's not physically, technically possible to do in the facility, then either money and time is going to have to be invested in improving the facility, or else somebody has got to say no, thank you. They also, of course, possess a large range of practical skills, and they're very good at lateral thinking. They may not actually have used the techniques that the scientists are considering using on that particular species, but they may have done something similar on another species or seen it done at another facility, and are very good at translating those skills into ones needed for this specific experiment. And since they know the animals best and the animals know them best, they should be the ones doing most of the work. The animals will be less stressed, and as a result of that, the animals will provide data which reflects the treatment they received rather than the stress caused by handling or by strangers that have stressed them. And if we don't involve them, all we're doing is just creating anxiety and depression, more opposition to animal research, and not least limiting their creativity, which could have improved the experiments that are being done at the facility. I've written a blog about this in +1 last year, if you'd like to read a bit more about my thoughts on this. The need for a culture of care has been very clear to us during the COVID-19 pandemic, because of the problems in servicing an animal facility in lockdown and avoiding cross-infection between the staff. So we've made a separate web page where we are collecting practical advice, resources, considerations for institutions working during lockdown. And a lot of the advice on this page is connected with how we can provide a culture of care and look after staff who are working under these difficult conditions. And just to end, I'd like to give you a quick view of some other 3R projects that are either just been finished or just starting. The first one, it was a collaboration that I had with Anna Zinch, Jan Bas Prince, Nikos Kostomitsopolis, which we presented at the Thalassa Congress in 2019. And it's all about the fact that in Europe, we have to categorize the procedures that we use on laboratory animals into mild, moderate, or severe. And we made a compilation of severity classification. There are several guidelines for the categorization of procedures into these categories, and the categorization varies slightly from guidance to guidance. So we made a compilation where we made a table listing interventions to the animals, disease conditions, the effects of on pharmacology or the effects of housing, and here, for example, in the case of substance administration, we then listed the sources of guidance. In this case, you can see there is guidance on severity classification from the EU directive, from the UK Home Office, and from the Swiss Federal Food Safety and Veterinary Office. And along the top of the table, we can see the 4 categories, either non-harmful, mild, moderate, or severe. And we can see whether these 3 sets of guidance agree upon categorization of the administration of substances or not. And if they differ, then we can see in what ways they differ. And this table is designed to help scientists and regulators who are trying to decide whether a given procedure or treatment should be classified as mild, moderate, or severe. And then I'd like to mention a few projects that are going on in Norway at the moment. We have received funding together with other major 3R players in Norway for 2 research projects from the Research Council of Norway, both directed towards fish research. One is establishing frameworks for classifying the welfare of salmon based upon severity assessment. In Norway, salmon comprise well over 90% of the animals that are used for research and testing in Norway. The second project is on the development of hepatic spheroids for in vitro testing within toxicology, again to do with fish testing. And we have I'd like to mention also 3 other projects which are now actually completed. Enrich Fish, which provided data on how we can improve the welfare of salmon used in laboratory experiments. One called 3R CAAT, which gave us a strategy for suggestions for how we can increase implementation of the 3Rs in Norwegian fish research. And also a survey of the way fish are used in Norway and their environmental requirements and welfare indicators, which was used to start many of the other projects that we're working on. And one final one, we are in the process of funding work in Bergen on the west of Norway on producing an app which will be used to monitor fish tank sides during experiments, where we can use welfare indicators, score sheets, humane endpoints taken from the permissions that the scientists are being given to monitor the experiment on a continual basis. We can refine the welfare indicator scores that do exist already, and we can record this information. We can get alerts when the animals are approaching the endpoints that have been stipulated for the experiment, and store and then report this data. So that's an exciting development which is underway at the moment. We've had a lot of sponsors for our work, and I'd like to thank those who've contributed to what I've been describing. You may have noticed during this presentation there were some icons for preparing, caring, sharing, and flagging. We produced those earlier this year in connection with a conference, and I've made both animated GIFs and then these JPEG icons as well. And if you would like to use them in any connection, you're very welcome to download them. I find this a nice way of explaining the key principles of good laboratory practice, and you can download them from the address at the bottom of the slide. So my last slide is to tell you that if you find this work of interest and you'd like to subscribe to the newsletters that we produce in English 7 or 8 times a year, at the bottom of every page on the Norecopa website, you'll find this white box where you can add your email address and start receiving the newsletters. And there's also a link where you can give feedback. That's on every page, so you can give feedback on specific pages if you wish, while you're browsing the website. And that is all I plan to say, and I'm very happy to take any questions or comments there might be, and thank you for listening.